Hi, I'm Lindsay, and this is Kinda Healthy Podcast. Today, my guest is Whitney Morgan. Whitney tells us of her personal experience with autoimmune disease and some strategies she's learned to help other people too. Here's my conversation with Whitney. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thanks for joining me tonight, Whitney.
Yeah, good to see you, Lindsay. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm super excited. Now, am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes.
Okay, great. I love the way you spell it, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I could never get anything personalized when I was a kid.
Right.
I couldn't walk into the gift shop and just grab something, but yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, like the old keychains and
Yeah, keychains, mugs, little license plates.
That's right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so Whitney, I know you are a thyroid expert, and a lot of times people are passionate talking about these kind of issues is because you've had a personal experience yourself. So was that the case for you?
Yes, it was. Actually, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. That was my third autoimmune diagnosis. So I was already on the autoimmune path by the time I got that diagnosis. But yes, I mean, I can remember there were days when I would get out of bed, and the minute I stood up, my heart would be racing, my blood pressure would drop. I would literally crawl on my hands and knees to the bathroom.
Wow.
Because I just didn't have the energy to get myself up and going.
Right.
You know? So when I got a thyroid issue, I crashed into a thyroid issue.
Wow.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I know kind of goes hand in hand with that, or at least is talked about a lot, is gluten sensitivity too. So what would you say would be some of the signals to somebody that maybe they have a sensitivity to gluten to the range of actual celiac disease symptoms?
Yeah, that's a tough one, Lindsay, because when people think gluten sensitivity, they think, oh, gas and bloating and stomach cramps and being stuck on the toilet for, a day or two. But that's actually a small percentage of people.
Okay.
The organ that's most impacted by gluten isn't the gut, it's the brain. And then next it's the thyroid. So one of the classic signs is anxiety and depression and panic attacks. I always suggest anyone who has any combination of that, they get tested for gluten sensitivity because it's just such a huge correlation. But then you can get skin issues. You can get nutrient deficiencies, early osteoporosis, not able to get pregnant or not able to carry a child to term. And of course, you can have a lot of gut issues, right, as well.
Right.
Any sort of autoimmune diagnosis is a big red flag that you may have an underlying gluten sensitivity, no matter where the autoimmune disease is.
Right. Yeah. And that sounds like a lot of common things people are experiencing nowadays, the anxiety, skin issues, and things like that. It can all go back to having a problem with what you're eating, right?
Absolutely. And I hear it all the time that from folks when they say, oh God, I don't have a problem with gluten because I eat it and I'm fine. But the thing is that you can't really tell when you have a sensitivity. Most people who have food sensitivities, those symptoms don't show up for maybe a day or two or three.
Okay.
Right?
So it can be hard to connect what the source was.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And a lot of times the way we eat is something that we were brought up with and that you don't really question. So that can be difficult sometimes for people to address that maybe just the way they're comfortable eating and the way they're comfortable looking at food might be part of the problem.
There is that for sure. And then also that mindset of, well, I've always eaten this my entire life, right? So therefore it can't really be bad for me. But another thing about food sensitivities is we're not born with them, right? We can be born with the predisposition to develop allergies, but sensitivities, they show up later in life. And they usually show up because there's other things going on, primarily a leaky gut. And so things start getting through the gut that the immune system recognizes as a foreign invader, even though it might be just some benign, healthy food you ate, and then boom, right? It tags it. So you can develop a gluten sensitivity that shows up later in life for sure.
Okay. So how would people handle something like going out to eat with trying to be concerned with watching their gluten? We already know we can't, keep track of the amount of fat and the sodium that's already in those kinds of foods. But then to add gluten on top of it, that's got to be really difficult.
It is difficult. My clients have a really hard time going out to restaurants, but actually they have a harder time like going to parties or dinner at mom's house, or, Thanksgiving somewhere, Christmas somewhere. It's a little bit easier to keep yourself safe in a restaurant, because they have systems in place, they have a basic awareness. But my basic rule of thumb when you're thinking about dining out is, for starters, never go to a restaurant without checking the menu online first. Make sure that there are gluten-free options on the menu, that it clearly states gluten-free options are available. If there's no mention of gluten on a menu, that's a warning sign that there's just not a level of awareness, that you probably aren't going to be safe. So you just need to go somewhere else. But other things are calling ahead and saying, hey, do your kitchen staff have specialized training in cross-contamination? It's not uncommon actually these days for the people in the kitchen to get training like that. Some kitchens will have different prep spaces, different ovens, dedicated fryers for the gluten-free stuff and then the breaded stuff. So just getting a sense of how well are they trained, what's their level of awareness, what can they describe some of the procedures they have in place, right? To actually keep you safe. If their answers are like really vague, or they're just like super confident and dismissive, that's suspicious. But even if everything you hear on the phone sounds really good, once you get to the restaurant, you still have to reconfirm all of those things with your wait staff. Right? Make sure the person who's actually handling your order is really aware that this is medically necessary for you. I tell people, just say you have celiac disease. It doesn't matter if it's not true. It's actually the kindest way that you can communicate to them the medical necessity of your dietary choice. It's not a fad, right?
Yeah. I know it was very like I remember when it first started being more of a thing that you would hear about, and you would start seeing the breads and things like that at the store for people with celiac. But yeah, I mean, so a good thing to do would be not expecting to solve the problem if you just show up to the restaurant and address the issue there. But then you talking about going to holiday functions and eating with your family, I could see that being a problem, especially a lot of times your family tends to want to push things on you or be like, I'll put it in there, but I won't tell her, it'll be all right type of things.
Right. Yeah, that's the most stressful interaction for my clients, without a doubt. And, unfortunately, sometimes that means, you have to eat before you go, or you have to make sure that you pack enough of your own food to take with you in case you need to have something to nibble on throughout a long day, or, a long time at a party or an event. If it's a potluck, bring something that could satisfy a whole meal for you, like a big chicken coleslaw salad or something like that. And you just eat what you bring, and that's it. I mean, there are ways to skin that cat, but it's, it's really difficult with family and friends because there's almost a sense of burden, right? That you're going to be a burden to them, and you don't want to be a burden to them. But then there's also on their end a sense of pride in what they're doing. And so, if they don't feel like their food as it is appreciated, they take offense, right? So there is a lot of tension around that dynamic.
Yeah, because there's a sense of rejection with that for them, right? If you don't accept the food.
Yes.
So what's your perspective then on making people aware of it as opposed to quietly kind of, not announcing the issue, but like you said, bringing your own food, but maybe not saying, I brought this because this, and maybe people wouldn't notice or get offended. Is that
I think it depends really on the situation. If it's like your sister, your mother, people who are in that real intimate circle, right? Or your best friend. I think you need to put some effort into making them understand how important this is for you, that this is medically necessary. This makes a big difference in how you feel. And also getting contaminated with gluten can not only make you sick for a while, but doing it regularly can shorten your lifespan, right? You can die 10 or 20 years earlier than you're supposed to. So it's not a small thing. So put the time and energy into those people that are closest to you. When you're talking about, the casual acquaintances and whatnot, most people understand, I'm on a restricted diet right now for health reasons. And so my doctor has been, or my coach, whoever my naturopath, whatever you want to say, has given me a very specialized diet. So unfortunately, I kind of have to pack my food wherever I go right now. Right. And that usually takes it off the table.
Right. Yeah, I know. I feel almost like people have this strange reaction to hearing that, your diet may be restricted. It's almost like people hearing you say that gives them the fear that maybe that's something they'll have to deal with too, if they really think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the kind of connections we have with food. There's a lot of emotional connections, and part of the emotional response to food isn't just things like happiness and love and, I feel good when I eat this, but it's also fear.
Right.
Right. And anger and resentment, it's a very emotional topic. So trying to diffuse the emotion out of it as much as possible is usually the best route to go. But also, I think part of it is at some point you have to develop kind of this stiff spine about it. Because if you have Hashimoto's or any other autoimmune disease, this is something that you need to be diligent about for the rest of your life. You cannot be in a situation over and over again where you're getting contaminated with gluten, because it has serious health consequences. It can. So my personal strategy in my own life was just to become this, badass gluten-free warrior where, okay, I'm going to educate you on all this stuff, right? I'm going to be in your face. And it's the one thing I can talk about all the time at family dinners, or when I go visit family that live out of town, and sometimes they roll their eyes. Oh, Whitney, you're going on again about your gluten soapbox. But I just kind of take it as kind of a badge of pride. And my mindset is, I'm not really just doing this for myself. I'm doing this for everybody. Right. The more warriors we have on the front line who are really telling the hard truth and getting up in your grill, so to speak, the easier we make it for everybody else who is less comfortable doing that.
Right. Because a lot of times people can kind of almost look at it as another fad diet type of thing. We're all so used to fad diets coming through that it can be easy for somebody to associate a limited diet with that type of eating. So yeah, it can be hard for people to take it seriously.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard.
So if other issues when you're trying to be careful, are there some pitfalls and common mistakes that somebody could make when they're, say, trying to eat at home and they think they're being careful, but there's still little hidden things they may not know about?
Yeah, in fact, that's probably the toughest nut to crack, because most people who go gluten-free, most people who I work with are women, and women are 3 times more likely to have autoimmune diseases than men, right? Okay. So we just tend to collect them. So usually you're talking about a woman, usually in my field, you know, they're mothers, they're wives, they don't live alone. So if they're just trying to create this gluten-free bubble around themselves and keep themselves safe, there's always a certain level of risk that they're going to get contaminated, because everything in the kitchen is contaminated, right? And or has the potential to be a source of contamination. So I say the best thing you can do is transition to a gluten-free house. If there's any way that you can just take the whole house gluten-free, that is your best and safest thing. That's your best and safest strategy. And particularly for women who have children, it's the best thing for the kids too, because these kinds of sensitivities don't just happen in a vacuum. They tend to show up in families.
Okay.
And what shows up for the mom as Hashimoto's and psoriasis might show up for the child as failure to thrive. You know, they're the shortest kid in the class. They can't gain weight. Or maybe they have ADD or ADHD.
Okay.
So there are other, or behavior issues or learning disabilities. There are other ways in which it expresses. So you can't always recognize it based on what it's doing to you. Right?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good thing to point out. So it can look different for everybody, how it manifests in your body. Okay. And then, so that can almost make it a little bit harder for people to recognize too, because it's not, well, if you have this, then this is how it shows. It could be hard to link it to different conditions, huh?
Absolutely. And that gets back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is it can show up anywhere in the body. So for one person, their gluten sensitivity might be eczema. For another, it might show up as panic attacks at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? And then both of these people go see their doctor, and the one with eczema gets sent to the dermatologist, and the one with panic attacks gets sent to the psychologist. Right. But rarely are they tested for what they both have, which is an underlying gluten sensitivity. Now, I'm not diagnosing everyone with eczema or panic attacks with a gluten sensitivity. I'm just saying that those are common expressions of a gluten sensitivity, but it's not recognized really in the mainstream. So most people go undiagnosed for a really long time until the wheels really fall off the bus, right?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, that is good for people to know, because a lot of times if you do have an issue like eczema or any of those other things, you know, you usually are going through a process of elimination to find out what it is. You don't usually knock it out right away. So it is good to know that that's just another avenue to go down and check to see if that's where your symptoms are coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can get tested, right? There's some really good testing out there, but it's very specialized. It's not like something your doctor can do for you. Most traditional docs aren't even aware of the really comprehensive wheat and gluten sensitivity testing that's out there. So they'll usually run what's called a celiac panel on people.
Okay.
And celiac blood work panels don't catch gluten sensitivity. About 90% of the time, they won't catch it. Only 50% of the time are they going to catch celiac disease. So it's really not a great test if you want to see, hey, do I have a problem with gluten? For that, you need what's called a functional lab.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like that's something I've been hearing a lot doing the podcast, is that, you know, there's things that aren't caught with traditional tests, and that we always need these more advanced tests to kind of feel out some of these issues that we're having. I wonder, at what point will that just be, you know, and accepted you step 1 and step 2 to figuring things out? Because if you don't do these advanced tests for more things, how are you ever going to really know what's going on in there?
Well, exactly. And that brings us into this like discussion of 2 different paradigms, right? Jeffrey Bland, who is the father of functional medicine, he wrote a book called The Disease Delusion, I believe. And it does a great job at illustrating this cognitive dissonance, right, between traditional medicine and what we think of as functional medicine. So traditional medicine came out of this model of eradicating bacteria and viruses and disease diagnosis, disease management, whereas the functional model is addressing chronic disease, and traditional medicine doesn't really know how to grapple with chronic disease, right? So what they end up doing, unfortunately, is treating symptoms and not looking for underlying causes.
Right. And you can just keep continuing to treat the symptom if you never get to the cause.
That's right. And then you get more symptoms, right, in different places. And so you go see different specialists. So now you've got a dermatologist and a rheumatologist and a psychiatrist, and you're right. And they each see your set of symptoms through their specialized lens, and give you pharmaceuticals to cover up the symptoms, but they don't really see a connection between all of those things.
Right.
Whereas a functional practitioner is looking at all of those things and going, okay, what's at the root of all of this? And in Chinese medicine, they've been doing this for thousands of years, and it's called the root branch philosophy. And it's based on, a tree or a gardener, right? So the symptoms show up in the branches and the leaves. But if you really want to bring that tree or that plant back to its most vital sense of life, you have to tend to the soil, right? Because it's what's going on in the root system that usually gives you those symptoms in the trees and the branches. But that traditional medicine, where they're just stuck in the trees and branches, and they're like monkeys flying around going, oh, it's here. No, it's here. No, it's here. Right. So we need to be gardeners. Yeah. We need to get down, pay attention to the root.
Yeah, because our bodies are complicated and we're all individuals. And the manifestation of things from one person to another is different. So if you can get the experience of looking at yourself in a more holistic way, at least that way you're at the right starting point for knowing, that there is a domino effect for all your actions, right?
Right. Yeah. And interestingly, when I work with women, usually they're coming to me somewhere in their mid 30s to mid 50s. And by the time they get to me, they've already gone through a bazillion doctors, and they have this collection of seemingly unrelated symptoms, but they can tell you their story of when that first domino fell, right? I got this symptom, and then this one, and then this diagnosis. And by the time they get to you, they're like, everything's broken. Right. I mean, everything, where do I start? But if you flip that mindset, it's like, okay, well, the same thing is true in healing. You start with one deep thing and you make some very simple, meaningful changes. That also is a domino.
Right.
And it hits into the next one and the next one and the next one. Right. So we can heal in the same way that we fall apart.
Right. Yeah. A lot of times people can begin to feel betrayed by their bodies. I don't even know this thing that I'm stuck in and just want to get away from it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember feeling that way, literally like I just either did not want to be walking the planet anymore, or I just wanted to be somebody else. I didn't care who. I just wanted to stop being myself. And that is a very dark and lonely, devastating place to be, particularly when you're young, right? And you should have your whole life ahead of you. And then to be trapped or feel like you're trapped in a medical model that doesn't have anything to offer you, right?
Yeah, you can become hopeless very quickly.
Yes, I remember that. I can take myself back to certain moments and feel those feelings. And yeah, it can be a lonely, lonely thing.
Right. Yeah, I know. I really dislike it when I hear people, even just in their 30s, talking about, oh, my back, and talking about all their conditions, almost like it's something like I don't know, something to be proud of, or a sign of maturity that, oh, when I wake up, I hurt so much and all this stuff. And I mean, I'm 40, but I hear people who are much younger than me talking around me like they're in their 60s. And this is just an everyday, thing that they've accepted about themselves. And I'm like, it is way too early for that. Right?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a normalization
Right.
of these kinds of symptoms that we think of as old age symptoms. Right. Of chronic back pain, chronic joint pain, your hair is falling out and, all kinds of stuff. It's like, and you're 35. It's like, no, that's not normal.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how many people around you are feeling the same way. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal, right? There's something wrong. That's
right. I mean, because it can almost be like an icebreaker or a point of familiarity to start a conversation with somebody like, oh, this and that. Do you have that? And oh, yeah, I have this. It can almost be like something that you can build a friendship off of, a very badly structured one, but you can kind of use that to start relationships.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I actually, I see that on Facebook now with different Facebook groups for different diagnoses, right? Different disease states. And there's a few gluten sensitive and celiac groups out there. And I mean, I'm all for people getting the support that they need. We need community. We need to not feel alone, right? We need to be connected. But just like, that old saying, you are the 5 people you hang out with the most, right? It's like, well, you're the 5 Facebook groups you spend the most time in, right?
Scary.
Yeah, it's scary. And sometimes what I see is just a bunch of, lamenting and this helpless victim kind of mentality. And,
right.
How do I feel better, but not make any changes in my life?
Right. And another thing is when people say whatever the situation is, using that as a way of identifying yourself. And that just speaks to this whole acceptance and, subconscious unwillingness to change it, really, because that'll change the whole way you look at yourself and probably the whole way you have to function in your life. So that would also mean you might lose relationships if that's something that you're not hanging on to. You may not know, you may be uncomfortable because you don't know what to do with yourself now, and how to look at yourself differently. There's so much that goes into those identity structures that we build for ourselves. So it's so important that we do it from a positive place instead of a negative one. Even if you don't intend on doing it, you need to be aware at some point.
Yes. And there's this, you've heard of the placebo effect, right? Well, there's also this nocebo effect where, and that's kind of how I feel about what people get from certain traditional medical practitioners is a nocebo effect. They get their diagnosis. I remember I got diagnosed with interstitial cystitis, which was a very, very painful bladder disease, autoimmune disease. I was in pain 24/7. It was horrendous. And the doctor actually said to me, nothing can be done. It's not going to kill you, but you will die with it. It's going to get worse. You should join a support group. I mean, this was almost verbatim what he said to me.
Oh my God.
In other words, he was giving me this like permanent sentence for the rest of my life. And here he was, this expert in his field. And if I had been in a different place in my life, I might have just accepted that and overly identified with his reality. But in that moment, everything in my body just screamed, no, that's not my future. You're wrong. I'm sorry, I don't accept it. And that's really the moment that my life started to change when I walked out of that office. And I just said, I'm getting on a different path. And this is a disease that is uncurable, right? I mean, this is like, once you have it, it's forever. That's the mindset, doesn't go away. There is no cure, no treatment. And I don't have it anymore. So, the power of the nocebo, I have to question how many of us actually have one of the greatest obstacles to our own healing is the belief and the faith that we put into the messaging we receive from medical practitioners that just don't have the training to deal with chronic disease. They're not asking the question, well, what's underneath all of this? Why is this happening? Right?
Yeah. So what would be the next step if that's the experience somebody's having with a doctor? How do they reach out, and where do they find the functional practitioners?
Yeah, there's different types of functional practitioners. There are functional medical doctors.
Okay.
There are functionally trained naturopathic physicians. There are people like myself who are functional diagnostic nutrition practitioners. Most Chinese medicine practitioners by default are functional practitioners because that's the basis of the philosophy of Chinese medicine. I'm also an acupuncturist, so I see it from both worlds. But yeah, it's you can reach out to someone like me, or in your community, just find a naturopath, ask specific questions. Do you have training in functional healthcare and functional medicine? Or go to the Institute for Functional Medicine online, check out their physician database, people who have been trained. There are different ways that you can get resources. And now so much of it is telemed, right? So it's not like it has to be in your community. Really, you just have to have internet access.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And most of the labs that I run on people, they get shipped directly to the client, right? Or they can just go to their local LabCorp and do the blood draw. I mean, it's so easy. So you don't need to be confined to where you live.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. That is one good thing about, how things are moving towards, is that some things, instead of just, just like internet and cable and all of those things becoming more accessible through technology and things, we're actually getting some more fundamental like health tools and things like that are becoming accessible due to all of that. So that's great to know. Yeah. Not being limited by where you live and all that is so important.
Yeah.
So another thing that people tend to have an issue with going down this road is also struggling with their weight, right? I see a lot of people talking about intuitive eating now. So if you're not aware that you have a thyroid issue, are there any specific dangers you may run into if you don't know that yet and you try to do these plans that people kind of talk about now? Because I hear a lot about intuitive eating. Is there anything particularly wrong with that if you don't know you have a thyroid problem?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I recently did a video about intuitive eating because I've been hearing a lot about that too. And it tends to really start to ramp up. The rhetoric ramps up right after the new year, right? When everyone's like, okay, I'm going to go on a diet. So there's this, diet culture versus intuitive eating culture, right? Like they're diametrically opposed. And so it can lead people to think that any kind of therapeutic diet is anti-intuitive, which is just wrong. I mean, intuitive eating is giving people, I think, in its worst version of itself, it gives people the idea that your body is wise enough to know what it needs in every moment of the day. You shouldn't have any sort of emotional reaction, guilt or blame, or beat yourself up. Just eat what you feel like eating. It's what's best for you. I think that's somewhat dangerous of a mindset because the reality is that we are big chemistry labs, right? And my chemistry lab is different than yours, but it is chemistry.
Right.
And what my body tells me to eat isn't just coming from intuition. In fact, it's rarely coming from intuition. It's usually coming from blood sugar, hormone signaling, right? And these are things that are impacted by your nutritional habits, your sleep habits, right. So you can live in such a way that actually has you wind up being hungry every 2 hours and craving more and more carbs.
Right.
And that's not your intuition. That's your hormones. That's your blood sugar. That's insulin, the blood sugar insulin roller coaster. It's also the microbiome, the organisms in your gut. They want their food, right? And so the more gram-positive overgrowth of organisms you have in your microbiome, the more carbs you're going to crave.
Right.
So you can't just assume that because you feel like you need that, whatever it is, that that's actually coming from your intuition.
I see. Right? Yeah. Right. Because if you have an overgrowth of something like candida, the yeast and stuff like that, it can really trigger you to want to have carbs and sugar and things like that. And it's just basically a parasite living off of you, taking control of you, telling you.
That's right. That's right. And you really feel like you need those carbohydrates in order to feel okay in the head, in order to function. But that's not intuition.
Right.
Now, what I say is, establish some guardrails first.
Okay.
There are certain foods that if you have an autoimmune disease, and that's really kind of my wheelhouse, the people that I work with, Hashimoto's and other autoimmune diseases. If you have an autoimmune disease, inflammation is your enemy. And so there are certain foods that are just inherently inflammatory for everybody that need to go. Okay. And it doesn't matter what your intuition says. They just need to go, right? And so if you can remove things that are obstacles to you healing, obstacles to you reducing your inflammation, then you have more space to use some intuition wisely.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah. And I was going to say that's a good way to look at it too, because a lot of times people can get hung up on the fact that they're just not allowed to have something, right? But to have it have a purpose and know the reason for it, I think can really be helpful to help people stick with it.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us back to gluten, because gluten really is the big bad. And I was listening to a podcast this morning. I forget the host's name, but she actually came out and said, that gluten is one of the biggest health hazards in our country today. And I absolutely agree. I was like, oh my God, thank you for saying that. Right.
Right.
It really is. It's not good for anybody. Doesn't matter who you are, whether or not you're sensitive to it or not. We can't digest it. It causes a leaky gut in everybody. It has a very toxic lectin in it that promotes fat storage, that disrupts hormone signaling, that can degrade your blood-brain barrier and make you more susceptible to neurodegenerative diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's. And right, I mean, it's just not a good guy, right? So, I like French bread as much as the next person, but because I have a certain amount of knowledge about gluten that is now hardwired into my body, I can't unlearn this stuff, right? There is no situation in which a piece of French bread even looks good to me. Right. To me, that's poison. Right. I can walk into any Starbucks and look at that case and feel absolutely nothing. It just doesn't. So knowledge is power, and the more you repeat it to yourself and the more that you know what it's doing in your body and why it's so destructive for you, the more you understand that it's keeping you from the life that you deserve. Right. The less hung up you're going to be when mom or sister or grandpa, you know, gives you a little crap because you're not eating the pasta.
Right. Right. I know, because it can be hard for some people to look at food as information that you're putting in your body, and it tells your body what to do from there, right? It's just a product. I ingest it, end of story. My body figures it out. But a lot of times the products that we have, and, you know, like you said, what we're eating, your body really doesn't know how to handle it. And it can be doing its best, but it can be, you know, getting damaged in the process.
Absolutely. I love what you said. It's information. It is. It's no different than a software program, right? That you're loading on your computer. This is information, and it can crash you, right? Or it can help you run more efficiently.
Right.
But usually it can't do both.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Yeah, I know that helps me sometimes, because a lot of times, you know, people can get caught up in their feelings about things, right? But if you do take your body down to a mechanical level, sometimes it can be a little bit easier to understand, knowing the cause and effect of what you're doing and what you're putting into it and what you're expecting to get out of it, right? Just like a machine. So, I mean, I don't want it to sound like, you know, diminishing, you know, our relationship with our body to that of a machine, but it does function in a certain way, and we need to respect that.
Yeah, we do. We need to respect it, and which is tough to do in our modern world with a lot of convenience food.
Right.
Right. There's a lot of bad information coming into this system for sure. One thing I try and teach my clients is some of these things that we put in our body actually change the way our brain functions, right? So gluten is one of those things. It stimulates opioid receptors in the brain. So, you know, most people are addicted chemically to gluten as a substance. And when they stop eating it, they feel pretty bad.
Right.
And they certainly get really irritable. And then if they eat it again, they feel a little better. Right. And that's the opioid receptors in the brain. But knowing that actually is helpful, because it allows someone to go, oh, wait a second. Just like we were talking about the microbes in the gut. It's like, oh, these cravings and this connection I feel for my daily croissant isn't just coming from, I don't know, my heart or my intuition. It's the opioid receptors in my brain. They want the fix.
Right. It's trickery.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Eat me.
Right. I know we're getting assaulted on all these different levels, right? Just with the advertising and social norms and things like that, you know, we need some information out there to help reinforce the good things so people know.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree.
So I guess on another issue with controlling your food, I guess, is fasting, right? So what are your feelings about fasting?
Well, it's not for everybody.
Okay.
It really depends on where you're starting from. But I mean, we all fast. We all go to sleep at night, and we all go for a long period of time without eating. And this is why breakfast is called
break fast,
right? So we all fast.
Right.
And we all fast for longer periods of time. When we get sick, our body goes, no, no, no. Right. Shut it down. And we just don't eat. But intermittent fasting, which is the choice, right, to go for a longer period of time without food and compress your eating schedule, that can be extraordinarily beneficial for most people, particularly those of us with autoimmune disease, because it takes the stress off the gut. It gives the body space to deal with infrastructure, with repairing, with reducing inflammation and cleaning out away dead cells and repairing tissue. and it stabilizes blood sugar. It helps to kind of cleanse the brain and cleanse the liver. We've been fasting culturally for 1,000 years or more. Usually it's for religious purposes in different cultures, right? That was part of it. But it is something that we do naturally, and it's something we've always done naturally as a species. When food was scarce, right? We'd have to eat a lot when it was available and then go without when it wasn't.
Right. We didn't always have this everything is always available lifestyle.
Yes, that's right. And the thing now is that we really are just such heavy carbohydrate machines.
Mm-hmm.
Our diet has become very heavy on these simple gluttonous carbs that are highly refined.
Right.
And so again, when that comes back to chemistry, it puts us in the state of constantly having to handle glucose, right? Because these carbs break down into glucose. Protein does too, but a little more slowly. And glucose is a fuel, but it's also toxic, right? And so the body needs to get it out of the bloodstream and burn it. So it's always going to burn the glucose fuel first before it ever goes to fat, right? So if you're always running on glucose, if you're like refueling those carbs every 2 to 3 hours, your body's just going to continue to store more fat, right?
Okay.
And then when you eat way too many carbs or way too much protein for your body to deal with in that moment, it's going to go, we got to turn it into fat because otherwise it's toxic, right? And so it's even more fat. So what I try and do with clients is put them on the type of diet that helps them to retrain their metabolic machinery, right? Increase their insulin sensitivity, reduce their dependence on glucose as a fuel, remind their body how to run on fat as well as glucose, right? So that when they have that first little bit of hunger in the morning, maybe it's at 8 o'clock or something, if they just wait a few minutes, the body will flip the switch and it'll go, oh, well, I can grab the fat right there on that thigh or right there on, on the waist and I can burn it. Right. And I won't be hungry because that'll keep me running for a couple of hours. So intermittent fasting, I think, is really great when it happens naturally, and it will happen naturally if you are retraining your metabolic machinery to remember how to use those fat burning muscles, right? Once you're intermittent fasting and that's comfortable and you're just kind of naturally not eating until 11 o'clock in the morning, and that's what usually happens to people is they just, okay, I'm only eating 2 meals a day now because I'm not getting hungry in the morning, right? Then you can think about doing some more intentional, longer fasts, like maybe 1 or 2 days or maybe 3 days. I don't recommend that unless you're under the supervision of somebody and you really know what you're doing. But it can be extraordinarily healing for the gut, for autoimmune disease, for a lot of neurological disorders, it's for metabolic issues, right? For people who are struggling with type 2 diabetes. It's extraordinarily therapeutic. And it's what we call nutritional ketosis, where the body is just like running off of fat as fuel. And it's super efficient. And it's fat is a much more clean fuel than sugar. It burns longer, right? And it produces less metabolic waste than the glucose does. So you really should be able to do both, right? You should be able to switch back and forth between both types of fuel and be very flexible metabolically. That's what we're really shooting for. And intermittent fasting can help you keep those muscles in tone.
Okay, yeah, because a lot of times, I know my husband is a person who doesn't want to eat breakfast and things like that. And so a lot of times I can think of people being like, oh my gosh, you got to eat breakfast. Breakfast is so important. But especially for a person who that's how their body is naturally inclined to be, maybe people shouldn't pressure them to eat as soon as they wake up, if they'd rather wait until 11 instead. And then also, talking about, it being an opportunity to give your body a break. I started thinking about all of these diets that you see that you have to eat every 2 hours to keep your metabolic rate up. And just the fact that your body is constantly working on that, because you're putting a little bit of food in at a time, right? But you're keeping yourself fired up and digesting all day long. That can't be good.
That's right. It's not good. And there are some studies that suggest that it actually shortens lifespan. You know, so we are built to go for longer periods of time without eating. And part of it, I think, unfortunately, is that we just live in this modern society where, you know, we're not out working in the fields anymore. We're not out hunting our food, and we're not gathering our food. You know, we got a fridge 6 feet away, and it's
there,
stocked. Yeah. Right? Calling to you.
You're like, oh, I don't know what else to do. I guess I'll go eat.
Right?
It's always available. Yeah. I know. Because back when people did get up and, you know, had farms and everything, you would get up and take care of some chores and the animals before you ate, you know. So it would be later in the morning, and you've already been working and burning. And so, yeah, the way we have it now with everything is just readily available and as much as you want it. And we're not even really taking what our body is asking for into consideration, right? We just like have this schedule that we default to and think, oh, it's this time, I'm going to do this, without even thinking about noticing what our body really wants at that time.
True. And then, you know, that kind of brings us back to intuition too. And, you know, the whole movement of intuitive eating, it also kind of makes me chuckle, because as a species, we are so anti-intuitive, if you ask me. Right. I mean, we are out of rhythm with the seasons. We're out of rhythm with the sun coming up and going down.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not intuitive to be up at 2 a.m., you know, streaming Big Bang Theory. That's not intuitive, but we will do it.
Right.
Right. Because it's there.
And hardly get any sun exposure.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, it's really interesting. But I think, you know, there are ways, particularly when the wheels fall off the bus and you wind up with a diagnosis that is chronic and, you know, quote unquote, incurable, like autoimmune disease. That's when you really do need to start talking about these things and thinking about these things differently, because, you know, what we've been doing as a culture is not working. It's creating the autoimmune disease.
Right.
Right. This isn't like, oh, just suddenly for some reason we have an explosion of autoimmunity. It doesn't happen out of nowhere.
Right. Yeah.
So we need to start reverse engineering those things and relearning habits that can help us to reverse the course of our diagnosis. Because diagnosis is not destiny.
Right.
It's not.
What would be the first bit of advice you would get somebody who maybe is listening to us now and never even took that into consideration, you know, getting into balance with nature and our bodies and everything? What would be the first thing you would suggest them try to do?
I think the first thing is to make changes in their nutrition, because if you're not getting that right, there's no supplement that can undo a toxic diet.
Right.
Right. You can't sleep it away. You can't meditate it away. So I would say the most powerful thing you can do, get rid of the gluten, dairy, soy, corn, refined sugar, industrial seed oils, and in some situations, alcohol.
Okay.
Right. I mean, you can have alcohol, certain kinds in moderate amounts, and still get a lot of progress. But those other things, they will keep you sick. If you're struggling to lose weight, they will keep you heavy. They will encourage your body to hold on to fat. There are those lectins in dairy and in gluten and in soy and in corn that are insulin mimickers, and they tell your body, they send the signal to your body to store fat. That's why we feed it to our cows and our pigs and right?
Right.
That's why we do it. It works. It's very effective.
Look at food packages, right? I mean,
that's right.
They slip that stuff in there any opportunity they have.
That's right. And all of those things are super inflammatory, and they promote a leaky gut in everybody. And that is what sets the stage for the autoimmune process in the first place. So you have no chance of turning around that autoimmune ship as long as you have that leaky gut and as long as you have that inflammation. You have to stop throwing gasoline on the fire, and all that stuff is gasoline.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. And that's pretty much the basis of what everybody's diet is.
Yes.
Right. So,
yeah. Unless you're paleo.
Yeah.
right. My little plug. Yeah. I mean, I think the paleo primal diet is probably one of the most therapeutic diets. It's a great template. It's a great starting point because it gets rid of the gluten, the dairy, the soy, the corn. It gets rid of all grains and legumes, anything that can punch holes in the gut, right? With a lot of anti-nutrients and phytates and all that stuff. It reduces inflammation, it stabilizes blood sugar, it retrains your metabolic machinery to burn more fat, right? And to be much more efficient. It's not the answer. It's not like the panacea perfect diet for everybody.
Right.
But the reason why I use it as a general template is because it removes everything that 99% of the time is standing between you and the health that you deserve.
Wow. Now, is there a way to do paleo wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, nothing against CrossFit, but I think the CrossFit movement kind of overlapped with this, bacon movement. And so it's like paleo is all meat all the time. No, it's not. Eating a paleo primal diet is still the majority of the calories you're consuming are coming from vegetables.
Okay.
Right. It should be like what you see on your plate should be 80% vegetable matter and 20% protein.
Okay. And people
right?
need to jump over to this meat heavy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's not what it means, because if you eat excess protein, that gets turned into fat. Just like the the bread and the croissant does. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important for people to know. Yeah, because a lot of times those kind of systems of eating can get distorted, and people get the wrong idea about the right way to go through it. That made me think of another thing too. When you are trying to do a food plan, a lot of times those don't take into consideration food sensitivities, period, right? So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what I usually do with my clients is, like I said, we start from a basic template where we're removing all those offending foods, right? So it's very similar to a paleo or a primal template. But then one of the first labs I run on people is a pretty comprehensive food sensitivity lab. And so we have to take away certain things that are allowed on those templates, but maybe your body doesn't like, like avocados or carrots or cucumbers or, who knows what it is for you or for me. But food sensitivities really tell us more about the fact that we have really poor digestion and we have really leaky guts and stuff is getting through that shouldn't make it into the bloodstream, but it is. So our immune system is freaking out, right? So most food sensitivities, that really is only for like 90 to 120 days that you have to avoid those foods. And as long as you heal and seal the gut and you calm down the immune response, you can reintroduce most foods that you're sensitive to. But gluten and dairy, no, that's forever, right? Corn, that's forever for most people. I mean, there's just no reason for that. But it can feel restrictive if things have really gotten to a point where your immune system is just really ticked off at everything.
Right.
You might have to be very restrictive for 12 to 16 weeks, but that's a huge investment. That's
Right.
like,
And it's not forever either.
no, it's
So,
not for, it's a summer school course.
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, think of it that way. It's just like, hey, I got to knock this out. I failed algebra. Now I got to do it in summer, and I got to do it fast
Right.
and focus.
Right. Because
Yeah,
people can get freaked out and maybe reject the whole process
Mhm.
altogether, hearing that they need to remove stuff. Right.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's that emotional connection again, right?
Mm.
Which we have to honor. We have to honor it, but the payoff is huge.
Right.
It's just huge. Yeah.
Right. So if somebody feels like they want to make changes for their health, the best method would be to remove the dairy and the corn and soy and all those things, like you said, rather than just watching their calories or
Oh yeah.
those kinds of things. That's not quite as important as removing the stuff that your body's reacting to, right?
Yeah, calories are kind of meaningless in my head. I don't think counting calories is good for anybody. There's just no reason to. If as long as you're eating the right things, it doesn't really matter what your calorie intake is, as long as you're getting it from the right types of foods, and you're allowing your hunger to guide you.
Right.
And if you get rid of the gluten, dairy, soy, corn, refined sugar, and industrial seed oils, your calories go way down anyway, right?
Right.
And your hunger changes too, right? So I mean, I think what you remove is the most critical step. And if you don't get that right, then you should never spend any money on any supplements ever again, because it's never going to do anything for you if you're not removing those things.
Right. Because it all goes to healing the gut. And once the gut is healed, then you'll absorb your nutrients correctly, right? Because if your system is off, you could be processing things too quickly and not getting the nutrients because it's moving through too fast, or it's building up and becoming toxic in your body too. So eating the wrong things doesn't really matter. Like calorie wise, if you're eating the wrong thing but lowering your calories, you're not going to get the results you want.
No.
Okay.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because a lot of times, kind of like what I said about your body being mechanical, that's one of those instances where the science of calories in, calories out isn't really the thing you want to focus on. It's the quality of what you're putting in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And also that calories in, calories out, I think it just sets us up for beating ourselves up, or feeling like failures, or feeling like, okay, well, now that I'm restricting myself for so long, now I need to reward myself. And we just get into this weird, like, ping pong mindset. It's not healthy.
Right. It's funny when we consider the thing that we're doing to hurt ourselves is the reward.
It's the reward.
We're doing the good thing.
Right.
I ate good all week. Now I get to beat myself up all weekend. Thank God.
Right. Exactly. Weekend warriors.
Right. It's so warped. Yeah. I know. I thought about that one time a long time ago. I was doing something like Weight Watchers, and it hit me because I was cooking American cheese in a pan so it would get toasted and like cooked because I liked Cheez-Its. And I was just like, I'm basically eating like toasted plastic. There's no nutrition, but the calories are low. And I'm just like, it hit me. I'm like, I don't think this is a real food I'm eating. Like, how is this what they're telling me, I can eat? I can eat, basically all of the, the processed stuff in the grocery store still, but it's low cal. And it just, it all of a sudden just went like ping, like this isn't what my body needs to run.
Yeah. Wow. That was actually a recommendation that you fry cheese?
No, that was my own recipe.
Okay.
The fact that I was allowed to eat crappy American cheese.
Right. Which isn't really cheese.
No, that wasn't in one of the books.
Yeah. Okay. That's funny.
Yeah. So, I mean, and then once you are eating good quality foods, your hunger does change, like you said, right? Your body
Yeah.
won't be craving these nutrients and telling you to eat,
Right.
because once it is getting the nutrients and the minerals and all of those things it needs, it kind of, it relaxes, it's not
Well,
triggering you to put more in because you're putting trash in with
right.
nutrition, right?
Well, and part of it too is just that you're putting trash in. Your body doesn't want trash. It can't run on trash. So your body's still starving for the things that you're not giving it,
Right.
right? Because you're giving it all this low cal crap, not
Right.
real
But you're
food.
not getting the message of where to find
But
it to give it to
yeah,
yourself, basically.
yeah. And your brain gets completely starved
Hmm.
on stuff like that, but that's not real stuff. So it's interesting to think that, yeah, I can eat all day in theory and starve my body,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not
Nutritionally,
eating
you're
real food.
starved. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And things like the processed foods, and particularly the processed grains, when we look at nutrient density, there are a lot of empty calories,
Right.
right? So you'd be much better off just taking a tablespoon of, dehydrated grass-fed organ meat,
Hmm.
than you would, eating 3 or 4 bowls of whole grain brown rice.
Right.
You'd be so much better off.
Yeah. And a lot of times with those diets too, they still try to make things look and feel like you're eating normally. So it'll be, like this waffle thing with this or that with all these artificial things in it. So it's low calorie. And you're
Right.
thinking, oh, look what I can have. It's just like before, but it's better for me. And
Just,
it's so messed
it's
up.
just like real food.
Right. How about we actually eat real food instead?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so funny that we get into this mindset of wanting it to still look like the dessert or whatever you wanted.
Hmm.
But maybe just give that up altogether. Don't
Yeah.
hang on to that and try to make things an imitation of something else.
Right. Right. I mean, there are certain things that you can imitate, like pancakes and waffles and things like that. You can make those in a healthier way that doesn't have the gluten and the grains and all of that, and you can still gain some comfort from,
Hmm.
having some pancakes. They're not going to taste like the pancakes that
Regular
you and I
pancakes.
grew up with,
Right.
but that's okay.
Hmm.
That's really okay.
Yeah, I saw a TikTok not too long ago of this vegan lady talking about how pancakes are like the worst food ever, and let alone have it be like a breakfast food, like the first thing you put in your body to
Hmm.
run on your day. Yeah,
Right.
it was so crazy. I heard that. And sometimes it's so funny when you just hear somebody say something and like, oh yeah, that makes sense, when you struggle to make those realizations on your own. Sometimes hearing it out loud and hearing it from another perspective or source can really make it finally sink in.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
So is there any last things you want to add to the episode, Whitney?
If there's anyone out there listening that's struggling with Hashimoto's or any other autoimmune issue, um, just think really, really strongly about making some significant dietary changes. Ditch the gluten and dairy and the corn and the soy and the refined sugar. Put yourself first. Don't worry so much about what your friends and your family are going to think.
Right.
Don't worry about inconveniencing others. You're worth it. And, the people who love you want you to walk this planet as long as possible. So making those changes will allow you to stick around for longer, right? And love those people. So, they can find me at Whitney Morgan Nutrition on Instagram, on Facebook. I put out videos every week about stuff like this. And I talk a lot about gluten, talk a lot about Hashimoto's. I'm always available to answer questions on Instagram. I love talking about this stuff. You can barely shut me up. So,
great.
Yeah.
That's good.
And look for a functional practitioner. Look for someone who can really be your guide and who can walk the path with you, and give you strategies for those rough patches, Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks again for taking the time to talk to me about this, Whitney. I really think you made a lot of great points, and I think it'll be really helpful for people to listen to this. And just thanks again.
Thank you, Lindsay. It was great hanging out with you. You take care.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye. You can find Whitney at Whitney Morgan Nutrition on Instagram and Whitney Morgan on YouTube. I'll have those links and all other links in the description below. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.